So thank you so much again for joining in for our Setting the Trend Straight, the Dish on Non-Dairy webinar. My name is Emily, and I am one of your Stop and Shop Nutrition Partners registered dietitians. Here is just a brief disclosure note before we get started today. So please note that all of the information I'll be sharing during this workshop is for educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute or replacement for any advice that you get from your own healthcare providers. Now, I'll take a few moments here just to share a bit more information about our Nutrition Partners program in case you're joining in one of our webinars for the first time. So Nutrition Partners is the team of dietitians here at Stop and Shop, and we provide a variety of free nutrition services to help you and your families find and support your version of healthy. We do this through our online classes, which you're all joining us for today. And additionally, our dietitians are also available for one-on-one consultations, and we share nutrition information through a variety of great online resources, from handouts to videos and more. So if you're curious to learn more, you can head to stopandshop.com/nutrition. All right, now let's look at our agenda for today. So we're first going to start by talking about what non-dairy is and why folks are interested in it. We'll talk a bit about nutritional differences between non-dairy and dairy products. We'll review some different options that are out there, and I'm happy to provide some recipe inspiration along the way. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to address those at the end of the webinar as well. If you do have any questions now or as we go throughout the workshop, please feel free to drop those into the chat box or the Q&A box, and I am happy to, again, address those at the end of our webinar. So with all those housekeeping notes out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so with headlines like the ones that you see here on the screen, it certainly is clear that the non-dairy buzz is here to stay, and the non-dairy or the dairy alternative market is expected to continue to grow. Now, we might be wondering, why is there this increased demand for these products? So let's talk through a few different reasons why people may be looking for non-dairy products. And there certainly are a variety of reasons here, right? There could be personal reasons, such as a person who follows a vegan diet and avoids dairy products. And with the rising interest in plant-based eating patterns, this certainly could be a driving factor in the rise of non-dairy popularity. There also may be personal reasons or personal preference. That might be a reason why folks are choosing non-dairy options. Maybe they just don't enjoy the taste of dairy foods and they like these alternative options. Another reason could be health-related reasons. So some folks might have a milk allergy or lactose intolerance that is driving them to look for these non-dairy options. Now, let's talk a little bit here about the nutritional differences or the nutrition content of these products. So if we first want to look at dairy products provide us with a variety of beneficial nutrients, and dairy products are an important food group on the My Plate framework, which you see here on your screen. However, this does not mean that we must incorporate dairy products in our diet in order to have a balanced diet, because that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, the My Plate recommendations state that fortified soy milk and yogurt are included as options in this dairy category. So you really can build a healthful diet without dairy foods, but we just want to ensure that we're getting the nutrients found in these foods from other sources. So let's take a few moments here to talk about what nutrients are commonly found in dairy, and then talk about some non-dairy sources. So to start off, as you can see here, milk in particular contains a variety of nutrients, but the ones that we're going to focus on today are calcium, vitamin A, and vitamin D. So let's start with that close-up of calcium. So calcium is needed to build and maintain strong bones and carry out many important functions in our body, such as regulating our muscles and our nerves. Now, this nutrient is naturally found in dairy products, but if we're looking for some non-dairy options, those would include fortified beverages such as alternative milks and juices, as well as fortified cereals and chia seeds. Certain leafy green vegetables, including collard greens, kale, and bok choy, have calcium. Calcium set tofu would be another source. And this essentially just refers to tofu that has had calcium added to it. It can help it actually form its solid shape, interestingly enough. And to determine if your tofu has been calcium set, you can just take a quick skim through the ingredients list and look for calcium. As you can see here on your screen, when it comes to tofu, it's typically seen as calcium sulfate. And lastly, another non-dairy source of calcium is fish canned with bones, such as salmon, for example. All right, so we talked about calcium. Moving on to our next nutrient here, let's talk about vitamin D. Now, vitamin D actually helps our body absorb calcium, which in turn helps build those strong bones. And it also helps our muscle and nervous system function and plays an important role in supporting the immune system. So really all around important there. Now, milk actually doesn't naturally contain very high levels of vitamin D, but it is typically fortified with it, which is why many milks are a good source of vitamin D. But little interesting fact here is that not all dairy products contain vitamin D. So milk typically does, but yogurt is not typically fortified with vitamin D. So if you aren't consuming milk as a source of vitamin D, let's talk about some other sources. Now, our bodies can make vitamin D from sunlight, but for those of us in the Northeast, we don't get adequate sun exposure all year long, so we can't rely on the sun to be our sole source. And unlike other nutrients, there are actually less abundant food sources of vitamin D, but there are a few out there. So let me just touch on what those food sources are. Now, fatty fish such as salmon and tuna are among the best natural sources of this vitamin. Halibut could also be a good source too. Other sources of vitamin D include fortified non-dairy beverages, fortified juices, as well as egg yolks. All right, and moving along to our last nutrient here, we'll talk about vitamin A. When you think of vitamin A, you might think about vision health, and that certainly is a role of this vitamin, but it also is important for immunity. Now, vitamin A is found in foods in two different types. So we can find vitamin A in our foods as preformed vitamin A, which essentially is a type of this vitamin that's already packaged up and ready to be used by our body. And we can also find vitamin A as provitamin A. And an example of this, some of you may be familiar with, is a beta carotene that we can find in produce items, and our body can easily convert that into vitamin A. Now, vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin and is naturally found in whole fat milk, so it has that fat in it. Now, when we take regular dairy milk, that's a whole fat milk, and we make lower fat milk, so we take out some of that fat, some of that vitamin A is lost with that fat as well. But there are regulations in place for lower fat milks to be fortified with that vitamin A. So vitamin A is added back into it, which is why all milk will contain this nutrient. So just a little bit of an update there. Now, this vitamin A, is abundant in produce items, especially those with red, orange, and yellow colors. And fun fact, it is even found in green vegetables as well. Cod, salmon, and halibut are lean proteins that contain vitamin A. Many non-dairy beverage options are fortified with vitamin A. And you can also pick up eggs to get some vitamin A as well. And that, just like vitamin D, the vitamin A is going to be found mostly in the egg yolk of an egg. All right, so now that we just briefly reviewed some of those key nutrients in dairy products, let's take a trip down the dairy aisles and talk about some milk, yogurt, and cheese alternatives and review some nutrition considerations for each. All right, so let's start off with non-dairy beverages or non-dairy milks. Now, there certainly are many different options. When you walk down the aisle, it can almost be a little bit overwhelming, sort of like this screen I have up here for you all, showing just a handful of what some of those different options are. Now, the main nutrition tip that I'll share here is that all of these different options will vary in nutrition content. So a plant-based milk may or may not be fortified with vitamins and minerals, and it may or may not be a good source of protein. Now, it is always best to review the nutrition facts label to determine this because fortification can vary from product to product, sometimes even within the same brand. Now, we often get asked what the best non-dairy option is or which one folks should pick up. And so in terms of nutrition content, I'll just start off by saying that a fortified soy milk typically most closely resembles cow's milk. So as you can see here, this fortified soy milk is similar to cow's milk in terms of vitamins A and D, calcium, and protein. Now, other popular options such as oat and almond milk are often fortified with vitamins A and D and calcium, but contain minimal protein. And again, I'll leave my little asterisk here that the fortification can vary. So an almond or an oat milk may or may not be fortified with those vitamins and minerals. Now, another thing to think about when we pick up non-dairy options is that non-dairy milks may also contain added sugar. Even if a product is labeled original, we might see, a certain milk labeled as original, and we may think that that means no added sugar, but oftentimes those original flavors do still have added sugar in them. So it may be helpful to look for options that are labeled unsweetened, or you can check the nutrition facts panel and see if they have no grams of added sugar. Now, with all this being said, that doesn't mean that other non-dairy beverage options are not good choices, because a soy or a nut allergy, or even just personal preference, may be the deciding factor in choosing the best non-dairy option for you and your family. Just be sure to take a look at that nutrition facts label, and if the product doesn't contain these nutrients, just ensure that you are obtaining them from other sources throughout your day. All right, next let's talk about non-dairy yogurts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yogurts do not typically contain vitamin D, but they do contain calcium and protein, just to name a couple nutrients there. Now, Greek yogurt will contain even more protein than just plain yogurt because of the way the straining process is in creating Greek yogurt. Now, if we look at different non-dairy options, they can come from a variety of different bases. Some might be made from soy or almond or coconut. So I'm going to pull up a few different options that we carry here on the screen so we can discuss their nutrition content. So first up, I have our Nature's Promise plain almond milk yogurt. As you can see here, it has no added sugar. It has a bit more protein than some other non-dairy options out there, but it does not fortified with vitamin D or calcium. We'll take a look next at this Silk soy milk yogurt. It also contains a bit of protein. It is fortified with vitamin D and calcium. But if we take a look at that added sugars, I'd say it is quite high in added sugar, with this one having over 30% of your daily value in one serving. Next, we have this Forager brand yogurt, which is actually made from cashew milk. And as we see here, it is a bit lower in protein. It's not fortified with vitamin D or calcium, but it does have no added sugar. And lastly, we have the So Delicious coconut milk yogurt, which is low in protein, low in vitamin D and calcium, and has a high saturated fat content. Now, when we think about fats, saturated fat is a less nutritious type of fat that we want to limit in our diets for overall health, but really to help promote heart health. And saturated fat is found in animal-based fat products. It is also found in coconuts. So non-dairy options that are made from coconut do tend to usually have higher saturated fat contents. Now, as I discussed earlier with the non-dairy milks, there are no good or bad yogurt options. Some just contain more nutrients than others. And so if you did grab one of these yogurts for a breakfast or a snack and you want to bump up the nutrition content, you could easily add a few toppings and make a nutrient-rich yogurt parfait. So I have a few suggestions here. First, you can mix in some chia seeds to add in some protein and calcium. You could then also mix in some nut butter or even top it with nuts or seeds for an added protein boost, and you'll get some healthy fats there as well. And then to help minimize daily added sugar intake, you could select one of those unsweetened yogurt options and then add in fresh or frozen fruit for that bit of sweetness. All right, now the last product type we're going to review is cheese. When we think about regular cheese, cheese provides protein and is a good source of calcium, as you can see here. But because cheese is made from milk fat, it is also high in saturated fat. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the less nutritious type of fat that we want to limit in our diets for heart health. Now, when we compare cheese to non-dairy alternatives, which you can all see on your screen now, most are going to have a similar fat content. And this is because non-dairy options are typically made from some type of oil. And depending on what type of oil is used, the saturated fat content is going to vary. And for example, as I kind of mentioned earlier, coconut oil, coconut-based products is something we'll see typically with non-dairy options. And if a product does use coconut oil, that's what's going to result in that higher saturated fat content. Now, another difference amongst these cheeses is that most non-dairy options will not contain any protein, whereas regular cheese will. And then as we can see here, some non-dairy options are fortified with calcium and some are not. So I'd say my general nutrition takeaway here with non-dairy cheese would be similar to the recommendations for regular cheese. Because these foods are higher in fat and some are higher in those less nutritious types of fats, they should be used in moderation to add flavor to nutritious meals. All right, now if you are dairy-free, but you want to find recipes that still have that cheesy flavor, I do have a few options here for you and a bit of inspiration. So the first product I wanted to talk about is nutritional yeast. And I'll actually throw out a question here to you all. I'm curious, has anyone heard of this before? And if you use it, what are some of your favorite ways to use nutritional yeast? So feel free to open up that chat box, type in some thoughts there. And in the meantime, for anyone who's not familiar, this is a cheesy umami seasoning that's made from dry inactive yeast, which I know does not sound appetizing much at all, but I do promise it really does have a great flavor. And essentially you could think of it as just another dried herb or spice. And people will often use it as a non-dairy replacement for cheese since it gives, again, sort of that undertone of a savory, umami, cheesy-like flavor. And I see someone commenting here in the chat box, someone saying they use it on salads. They'll use it in recipes in place of Parmesan cheese. Really great ideas here. It really is very versatile. Like I said, you can essentially just think of it as a dried herb or spice and really use it in a variety of different recipes. For example, for a snack, you could sprinkle it on top of popcorn, maybe with some other herbs or spices. You could also mix it into sauces or pasta dishes to give a little bit of that extra depth of flavor. And the broccoli bites that I have pictured here on the screen use nutritional yeast for an added savory boost. Now, cashews are often used in non-dairy cheesy recipes because cashews, when you soak them and blend them, and you just soak the cashews to make them a little bit easier to blend, but once they're blended up with some spices, it can really mimic that creamy texture and savory taste of like a cheesy type dish. And so you could use cashews to make a creamy dip, maybe a pesto, or a mac and cheese. And I'll make sure to send out the recipes for all of the different dishes that I've highlighted here on the screen to you all in a recap email. So if any of these look good or it's something you'd like to check out, we'll definitely make sure you have the full details so you can do so. All right, now we've talked about a lot thus far in our time together today. So I just wanted to quickly summarize some of those key points that we've discussed. Now, as we talked about earlier, we continue to see that really these non-dairy options are expanding. And this could be due to the increasing popularity of plant-based diets. And as we discussed, there are certainly other reasons why folks may choose non-dairy options, such as different medical reasons. Now, we discussed the nutritional differences between non-dairy and dairy-based milk, yogurts, and cheese. And really, the main point I want to reiterate here is that no option is either good or bad. Some products or some options out there might just be higher or lower in specific nutrients. So be sure to utilize the nutrition facts label to determine the nutrition content of the product you're picking up. And if you're choosing a plant-based option that is lower in nutrients like calcium, vitamins D or A, just be sure you're getting them from other sources throughout the day. And lastly, I hope some of the cheesy recipes that I've provided and that I'll send out to you all can help give you some inspiration on how to get creative in the kitchen. All right, and that brings us to the end of our webinar for today. So I want to thank you all so much for joining in. And I